Hello, everyone. My name is Patty Mussolino. I'm a neurologist and a stroke specialist here at MGH. And we have together here Dr. Wishart and Dr. Peer, who are a part of our multidisciplinary team. And we have a luxurious session today, and one that has been asked by many families in extreme needs of really learning about behavior and social competence and the transitions from early childhood to more grown-ups, teenagers, and adulthood. As you guys know, this series started with a parent advisory board of our pediatric stroke multidisciplinary clinic, and that is composed by parents, patients, and therapists, and that have been basically trying to find how to provide resources that we can apply to our own journey, the one of ourselves, if we are the patient, or the kid, if that's the case, while at the same time trying to bring in expertise, but not just to lecture. This is not a lecture. This is what we will expect to be a workshop if there were no restrictions, but we're also very happy to be remote. It has expanded our access to many other families, not in New England. But the idea is to create a community where you guys can share resources. We always say the expertise is not in front of the room, is in the room. And this has been proven to us. I've been learning since we started this more than 3 years ago, how much knowledge and help and resources are there from the experience and the expertise that a family and the patients develop themselves to navigate, to help develop, to maximize the potential, and to troubleshoot a lot of the healthcare system limitations that we have. So today we have a great panel of speakers. We have the stroke thriver, as we call them, herself, Olivia. And Olivia, do you want to say hi? And her mother, Bonnie, who has been engaged. He's part of our parent advisory board, but also has been engaged her entire life in advocacy for children at the Federation, for children with disabilities, and many other organizations, and has contributed to our understanding of how do you navigate certain systems. And we are very lucky to have Elise Wolf. She's a senior project manager, Elise waving, here at MGH and the Aspire program. And basically she has been developing resources and working with a very diverse population of patients with neurological and psychiatric injury that are trying to navigate their interaction with the world, the social and emotional competence, and build independence. And how do you do that? And what support do you need? So we are thrilled to have the speakers, and as always, we are going to start with something that it comes from the patients. So I'm going to pass it on to Bonnie and Olivia, so you guys can tell us a little bit what has been your journey, your story, and in particular with this subject, the social competence and the transitions, what has been your own experience. And after that, Bonnie, if you can pass it on to Elise, so I don't take more time. As you guys know, the chat is open to connect between each other, and you can put the questions in the chat, and then Mara and I will help curate the questions, but we might call you so you can unmute your microphone and ask the question yourself. But as the questions arise, just please put them in the chat. And if you want to connect with anyone in the community, start networking. So thank you so much, and welcome to another of the Pediatric Stroke Educational Series in our Pediatric Stroke Awareness Month.
Good afternoon. My name is Olivia, and I am a pediatric stroke thriver and currently a communications student at Dean College. I'm 21 years old, and my stroke occurred around or at birth, but we don't really know when. I'm here today with my mom, Bonnie, to talk about my social development.
Thanks, Olivia. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all and share our family's experience.
Our story starts in Boston, but more specifically, Somerville. When I was younger, growing up in the city, I was very social, making friends everywhere I went, from the neighborhood park to my school.
When Olivia was young, at the playground near our house, she would just always join in with other kids. We were a part of a tight-knit neighborhood, and her preschool included everyone.
The friends that I made in these places created a sense of community for me and supported me with my disability. All that changed when we moved away.
We happened to move at a time when our old neighborhood and school were changing, and many of Olivia's friends were going in different directions. We left in part to find more supportive services, but we were all leaving friends that we really valued. And we arrived in a new neighborhood and a community, and it was like starting all over.
Moving was rough on me as a preteen. I felt lost without my friends that I'd grown up with.
Yeah, that transition was difficult for you. It was hard to maintain those old friendships, and it wasn't easy to make new friends. We did find some social support programs that were available in the community and at Olivia's school, and that was somewhat helpful. And there was a time where Olivia was talking with a counselor, and that was really helping her build self-awareness and how to work through the difficult feelings she was experiencing.
Well, it did take some time. I regained this sense of belonging after joining different activities and clubs like drama and my high school's radio station.
Yeah, starting at your new school, it took time, but you had some success in finding a sense of community when you tried out things like drama at your middle school, and then even outside of school when you started to find people who shared interests in things that you liked, like soccer and basketball.
After high school, I decided that my best path was to start at a local community college before transferring. Socially, it was hard to connect with other students, but I had a few friends that I was in class with.
Yeah, the year after high school really did help expose Olivia to new experiences. And we called it a gap year, but she was taking college classes and she was working part-time, which really helped to expand her comfort zone and helped build her independence.
When I transferred out of community college that spring, I thought I was ready to tackle all aspects of college, including having a roommate and being away from my parents and adorable dog. But living away at college was harder in many ways.
Yeah, it was a big adjustment for all of us, especially your adorable dog.
Academically, I was ready, but I continued to struggle socially, and having a very difficult roommate didn't help. But through it all, I grew as a person, became a better self-advocate, and decided to spend some much-needed time out of my dorm room. At the end of the semester, both my roommate and I were able to move out of that room, and I got to be in a single.
I was so proud of how you worked through those roommate challenges. You really found your voice and you were standing up for yourself. I thought you became a really strong self-advocate. And you managed the stress well too. You maintained your schoolwork, and you were going to on-campus events and doing other activities.
I never felt more free, but the freedom didn't last long as a global pandemic was beginning to crest on the horizon.
Yeah, you only had a few months that semester in your own room before the COVID shutdown.
Just like a majority of people on this call, the pandemic put an indefinite pause on many of the events that I was looking forward to. Ones that I thrive off of socially, like sports and college, were the ones that I felt the initial impact of.
Yeah, it's been hard to put so much on hold during the pandemic. And while Olivia was able to take classes remotely, she lost close to 3 semesters of living on campus. And we had really looked forward to that time being a chance for her to grow and, even kind of gain some more independence.
But the biggest impact of them all was the cancellation of the Chaser retreat in 2020. I've been lucky enough to attend these retreats since I was 4 years old. The retreat, which occurs every 2 years, is where my second family lives, and I'm so happy when I'm there.
And for anyone who may not know, CHASA is the Children's Hemiplegia and Stroke Association. They have an online support group and have been a lifeline for our family. They host family retreats, and our family has been to 9 retreats over the years, and it's meant a lot to us, and especially to Olivia.
So after the pandemic is over, I'm looking forward to getting back to everything, but especially my basketball programs. I'm on 2 teams, one that I've been on for almost 6 years. The group has such a strong sense of community with the athletes and their families. I just feel such a deep belonging. I started as an athlete, and as I, got out of high school and it just became harder to be there 100% of the time, I became a volunteer. The second team is more young adult oriented, but I am one of the youngest on the team. But it forces me to be a little bit more competitive and mature. And I'm just really looking forward to getting back on campus, and of course the Chaser retreats too. We wish you all the best of luck as the pandemic winds down and you re-enter your communities and reclaim what you've missed.
Yeah, Olivia, those basketball teams that you're on have really helped you, I think, grow into yourself and have a chance to really expand your connection to the athletes and the families. And the newer team that you're on that's a little bit more mature has really kind of helped you, I think, grow up and, beyond, our relying on our family. But so it's been a pleasure to be here with all of you and to share our story. We'll be here to answer questions at the end, after Elise's presentation. I've had the pleasure of hearing her speak before about social development. You are all in for a treat. So we look forward to hearing from you, Elsa.
Thank you so much, Olivia and Bonnie. I myself am a visual learner, so I have chosen to have a visual PowerPoint that I'm happy to make available following today's presentation in PDF form. So my name is Elise Wolf, and I am a senior program manager at MGH Aspire. So we are part of the pediatric psychiatry larger umbrella. Specifically, we do have offices that are out in the MGH Youre Center. So while we're under, for those of you that might be familiar, the Youre Center is attached to MGH's autism programming. What I want to start off by saying is that the Aspire programming, while we want to be diagnostically centered in the sense that we want to look at research and we want to make sure that we're looking at evidence-based practices based on the science about the relationship between what happens in the brain and how that impacts behavior, social development, executive functioning. We're not diagnostically centered on how we think about people, how we think about kids, how we think about teens, and everyone's own ability to become whatever version of themselves they want to be. So I'm really glad to be here today and to talk about this intersection of executive functioning and social competency. So executive functioning is quite the buzzword these days, and I think I get excited about that because we don't know anything about executive functioning. We think we do. We're starting to chip away at it, but there's so much more that we really need to understand about what this term is. And I think it's going to be really critical in how we support individuals moving forward in everything, in stress management, in social development, in organization. And that whole idea of transitioning towards independence, I really don't think can happen without a deeper understanding of what executive functioning is, how it develops, what we know now, separating fact versus fiction, and how we can grow someone's executive functioning with their collaboration. So Olivia, there were so many things about what you just mentioned that I'm just going to repeat. So thank you for setting me up with a lovely little softball pitch there. And I would encourage you, please jump in at any point if I'm talking about something that you have a personal experience of that you could really make more exciting than my presentation is going to be. Thank you. So MGH Aspire uses what we call our 3S model to think about individuals. And again, this is an extension of a diagnostically centered model. So I don't want people to think that we can't offer you support just because we're literally housed in an autism building. So when we think about an individual and their future, we want to make sure that there are not as many, if any, barriers in these areas of social competency, stress management, and self-awareness. So there's a bit of a reality that the world exists thinking about these 3 domains as having kind of norms. There are social norms, there are stress management norms, there are self-awareness norms. And as the world becomes a more inclusive place for neurodiversity, that spectrum, no pun intended, of norm is expanding. And yet in thinking about an educational model, we do have to kind of acknowledge that the world does have these norms. And once we're aware of what these norms are, then we make more informed decisions about how to best build our toolbox to decide where we want to fit in this spectrum of normalcy. So some of the core competencies Aspire wants to work on with our individuals and our families, and really get feedback from our individuals and their families, are in these areas of social competency, stress management, and self-awareness. Now, zooming out for a second, I really love to go back to science. And I want to think about the brain and what we know about the brain. So having some neurologists on this phone call, this is going to be the biggest oversimplification you've ever seen of neuroscience. But these terms are put on this visual of the brain near some of the core pieces of the brain that are important in controlling these functions. And Patty, I see you nodding, which means I can stop sweating, okay? So sensory processing is up in this blue part of the brain called the parietal lobe. We have executive functioning, which is near this orange part, our prefrontal cortex, core for executive functioning. We have emotional regulation, which if this were 3D, it's kind of tucked up in there in our limbic system. And then we have our social communication. And the reason I have this at the back of the brain is one of the concepts we're going to talk about tonight, this afternoon, is the relationship between vision and how we take in information from the world and our ability to make social decisions. One thing that I should say, I tend to be a very literal person myself. If there are any people interested in brain science in this phone call, your brain is not neatly color-coded, which is a bit unfortunate, but I think this model helps me in terms of being a visual learner. So what is social competency? You're going to notice a big theme about the way that I like to think about it, as I want to try to make it as concrete as possible. Anytime we're teaching something, whether it's to kids or teens or adults, we want to be able to think about it in as concrete, observable terms. It's really hard for the brain to learn new things when they're abstract. Our brains like concrete, nice little things that fit in boxes. That's how we like to learn. So these bullet points represent some of the ways we like to think about social competency in terms of a measurable, observable indicator that someone is moving in their journey towards independence. So one of the questions that I have on here that I want to throw out for us to think about before we get to the Q&A is, what are you currently doing that you feel really great about? So if you're an individual on this call, what are you doing in the social world that, as Olivia had some great examples, you're like, yeah, confident, got it. What are some pieces of the social world that you're like, why do you guys do this? Humans are so weird. Why do you do that? That's not the logical way to do it. Now, if you're a parent, a caregiver, or a clinician, I'd also like you to think about these questions in terms of, what are the questions that I receive that I feel confident I have a toolbox for answering? And then what are the questions that come to me that I say, I don't know how to help you there? And just think about framing that as a bit of an internal flowchart for how I can help you build your strategies. The next two buckets, we really can't talk about social competency without. And it would be naive, maybe even ignorant, for me to say that social competency exists totally separate than stress management and self-awareness. Because the reality is you have to be really regulated to get to the parts of your brain that pull out the social toolbox. Our bodies are designed to protect us first. They are not designed to socialize first. So if your body is receiving any messages or interpreting any messages of concern, fight, flight, stress, it's going to deprioritize the parts of you that are needed to socialize. So there's a critical intersection here that we're talking about, that we have to simultaneously think about our stress and anxiety about interacting with other people as actually a core competency for becoming our best social selves. And then lastly, Bonnie and Olivia, self-awareness came up so many times in what you said, and I think that's so critical, because how do you figure out who you like being around? Who's going to talk to you about things that you actually want to hear about? I certainly in my life have decided whether or not I want to maintain a relationship with someone based on my ability to judge, what am I getting out of this? Is this a reciprocal relationship? So given that our frame today is really focused on independence and supporting transition age, it's really important that self-awareness be a part of social competency. I have a bit of a pet peeve when I hear social competency discussed as keeping other people comfortable, having other people have positive thoughts about you. That's less than half of the actual educational concept of social competency. I really want to keep empowering our teens to say, do I like being around you? Do you have any social currency that makes me want to spend more time with you? And one of those reasons that self-awareness is so important is because socializing may not be the easiest thing for individuals working with other neurological or cognitive complexities, right? We may need to work harder to develop our language, to express our language, to manage back and forth conversations. Therefore, if we're not getting something out of it, we're going to lose motivation. And so now we're starting to talk about the role that executive functioning plays with social competency. So executive functioning, three core concepts that I'm not going to be able to go into today, but I would suggest anyone on this call start to develop a scientific understanding of: working memory, flexible thinking, and inhibitory control. Now, as someone who likes to teach things, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about making the abstract concrete. I couldn't teach these three things. So I like to work in the frame of executive functioning that breaks things down into different buckets. So I really like this visual that's here, the colored circle visual, because for me, it helps me better understand concretely when is executive functioning activated in an individual. I can't see someone using working memory. I can't see them using flexible thinking. It's not true that I can always see someone using action or memory, but it's a little closer to what I might be able to call an observable indicator. So thinking about how we support social competency with a mind to executive functioning, it won't be any surprise to this group that I am a really big proponent of a holistic approach, especially in today's world. You know, Olivia, you brought up the unfortunate reality of the pandemic and COVID. So access to technology and digital literacy became critical bricks in our ability to keep socializing in today's world. So when I think about an individual's social competency, I actually want to make sure I have data points in all of these domains. How do you feel about yourself? What's your emotional bandwidth? Do you like to socialize in the morning or the afternoon? How many social media platforms are you on? Do you know why people use each one? What's the difference between Instagram and Facebook? These are the concrete concepts that we can teach to empower individuals to have more information when we then add some of the more abstract social skills on top of it. So social competency, I want to not start us off because we're a few minutes in, but I want to make a distinction here. When I talk about social competency, I want to make a distinction between communication skills and social fulfillment. I think it is most powerful when these are separated and taught explicitly and then brought back together. So what I mean by that is communication skills, your language development, your vocabulary, how you organize your thinking to then share a thought with other people. And then in social fulfillment, it's about that self-awareness, stress management piece. How do you know, what are some things you could look for in a person to say, I kind of like being around you. We have this many things in common. If we don't separate these two things and talk about them explicitly, then the messaging gets a little muddied, because then we get back to a stance on social competency that's more about, are you meeting other people's expectations? And that's where we get kind of what happens in school and what happens in the workplace. But as we're talking about teens transitioning into becoming happy, competent, confident young adults, it's really important that they have opportunities to talk with people about what they like, what they do in leisure time, as opposed to just how other people receive them. So I have two pictures here underneath social fulfillment, and I want to just take a quick poll of the group. Now I can't see everyone, So I'm going to trust that you are participating in this, but I'm going to give you a choice of 2 types of music. And I would like you to raise your hand and tell me which is your favorite type. So the 2 types are classical music and jazz music. Right now, Girl Scout system, honor, raise your hand if you prefer classical to jazz. Okay. All right. Raise your hand if you prefer jazz to classical. Okay. Now, the good thing about being on Zoom is that there aren't going to be any fights in the parking lot after this, right? The jazz people aren't going to get on one side and the classical people on one side, and there won't be this kind of West Side Story battle, right? So somehow we have learned to coexist with the idea that you can have strong preferences for things, and it's not the be all and end all. That's also what we need to do for people that teach social competency. You need to recognize that you might be a jazz socializer, but the individuals you teach and support are classical socializers. So let's zoom out and think about this world. For those of you that love jazz music, the way that jazz musicians rehearse is they kind of get together. They might start with sheet music, but it flows. They wear whatever they want. In fact, sometimes I have questions about the fashion choices that jazz musicians make, right? When you get to the performance, it improvises. You might play what you played in rehearsal, but you might not. When you look at the worlds of classical musicians, where you sit is always the same. You are given a chair, and that chair does not change until there is a lengthy, organized discussion about your chair changing. What you wear to a concert is very clearly structured. When you rehearse, your goal is to find a way to play this music that will then sound exactly the same in the performance. And in fact, some pieces of it are so unchanged that the volume and the tempo are written on the page and have not evolved in 400 to 500 years. There are social forms. We come in, we bow, we say hi to this person. So these 2 worlds function very differently in a behavioral sense. And yet, we started off this conversation by acknowledging they can both exist simultaneously. So you or the child or teen or loved one you're here to think about may be a classical musician socializer. Their biggest version of social fulfillment may be to meet a specific group of people once a week at 7 p.m. on Tuesday nights to play Dungeons and Dragons, order 1 large cheese pizza, split it exactly down the middle using Venmo, and then maybe not talk again until the next Tuesday night. You, as the parent or the clinician, may socialize in jazz. You call your friend and you say, hey, I was just thinking about you. How are you? Those are very different approaches to social fulfillment. We're not going to say one is better than the other, but this is just a checkpoint for if you are the person coaching, teaching, educating your loved one in social competency, acknowledge what kind of socializer you are and take time to get to know what kind of socializer your child might be to let them build their own runway for social fulfillment. Oh, excuse me, my screen froze. I'm just going to do a quick time check for myself. So I'm going to get into one specific model that I alluded to a little bit ago about the relationship between social competency and our visual perception. And I don't want to oversimplify that to say that you need to have perfect vision, or you need to be working with an individual who does not have impaired vision to apply to this model, but you're going to see where I'm going in a second. So when we back up and we think about social competency, social fulfillment, and communication skills, at base, we need individuals to become independent by acknowledging there are others in their presence, get clues from those others, interpret those cues accurately, modify their own behavior. So these 5 steps are really what makes a young adult independent in their social competency. Some models of social skills will teach social development in a more behavioral approach, right? How to greet someone. Step 1, walk up and stick out your hand. Step 2, make eye contact. Step 3, say hello. And that could be a very useful starting point. However, if you take that same rote memorization approach and you apply it to your mother who you see every day, and you greet them those 3 steps every day when they come to your house, now it's going to be weird, right? Every day your mom comes over and you, hello. So this is where if we stick too much to an over-prescribed model of behavioral social development, we're actually limiting our teens and young adults and their ability to be as competent and confident as we want them to be. So we're going to take a bit of a road down to eye gaze and attention, because this is, I think, a critical intersection of executive functioning and social competency. This is an image from a study done by Dr. Ami Klin. Full transparency, Dr. Klin's research is in autism spectrum disorders. So I don't want to say that this research encompasses all neurodevelopmental disorders or delays, but I just want to highlight a point in how I think executive functioning can really help us build social competency in the future. So he had 2 groups of individuals watch this movie, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and they wore devices that tracked their eye gaze very sensitively throughout the movie. So this black line here is the average pattern of one group's visual scanning in the course of this scene. This white triangle is group 2's average visual pattern during this scene. So if any of you know this movie and you know this scene, something I want you to think about is if your eyes were here for a very long time and then they kind of went to this stack of papers and they went up here and then, was that a lamp? Oh, what's that? I can't see that in the back. How much would you have understood of what happens in this scene? You probably would have missed some of the most salient social information. So now let's talk about a teen, right? A teen, you're in class. Olivia, maybe you had similar circumstances. Your professor has you watch a movie, and this is your eye tracking pattern. The professor clicks off the video, or sorry, I'm dating myself here, right? And then the professor says, all right, class, tell me what just happened in that scene. If your eyes did this, you're going to give a different answer than if your eyes did this. The eyes are one of the starting points in telling the brain what to pay attention to. They're not the only piece, but there's a really deep link there. If you were in the group that had this white line, you are going to answer the way that the professor expects you to. Because what happens in this scene is a conversation between this man and this man about this picture on the wall. So if you're watching this, the chances of you understanding what the professor thought you would understand go way up. So this black group right here was identified as autistic individuals. This group right here identified as neurotypical individuals. This is an example of how our world is based in neurotypical assumptions. In the example of the professor, right? What he expected his class to have his version of social competency to accurately respond to this question. Now, Olivia, I'm not going to put you on the spot, so you can just nod yes or no for this. But were there ever times in your education that you think you answered accurately and someone else didn't? Someone else thought you said the wrong answer? No, you always nailed it? Sorry, let me ask the question differently. Are there times where you think you were expected to be socially perfect to learn? Maybe a little bit more? Okay. So what thrills me about your answer is that I think the world of education is evolving, which it should, which is awesome to hear, right? So what Dr. Klin did is he replicated this across different scenes and he looked at different versions of eye patterns. So for example, how long did you look at something? So let's look at this shot up here. If you were to think about, if the professor turns this off and says, what were these people feeling? If you were looking really closely at the center of this guy's forehead, you're likely to get the fact that he's showing you how he's feeling with this facial expression. If your eye gaze was a little scattered over here, you're probably going to miss the most important information and get the question wrong. So I'm going to step away from this research right now, but I think this is just really important research that tells us we're underestimating executive functioning and the brain's ability. We're underestimating the influence of attention in social competency. So now let's talk about why you're all here, which is what do we do? How do we improve this for you as an individual or for someone that you're supporting? So I'm going to be a broken record on this one, but make the abstract concrete. Neurodiverse brains do not best learn information by talking about big amorphous concepts. It's sometimes why therapy is really hard for neurodiverse individuals. How are you feeling? Well, what did you think about that? When I personally had experiences in therapy, that was not the most effective way to get me to learn, right? You can probably tell by now, I'm not a great abstract thinker. I tend to live over here. So one thing to be aware of is a critical component of executive functioning is your brain's ability to link similar experiences, right? When I went to this restaurant, it was kind of like this. So if I go to another restaurant, it's kind of going to be similar. Individuals with executive functioning deficits or some other kind of similar neurodevelopmental disabilities struggle to automatically link similar experiences. So this restaurant is going to feel completely different than this restaurant. It's harder for us to find what's the similarity between these two. Because of that, it makes it really hard to generalize and apply social skills across settings. Because your brain isn't as likely to say, oh, this is looking just like that other time when I was supposed to do this. If your brain doesn't tell you, remember, this is kind of like that other time, you feel like you're just in new territory. You're just floating there in a space of like, what's expected of me? People are watching. I don't know what to do right now. And that's just because your brain hasn't prioritized linking similar experiences. Again, another important influence of executive functioning on our ability to be independently social. These are some examples of how to make the abstract concrete. These are pulling from some, the ones in the back here are from some Michelle Garcia Winner content. Michelle Garcia Winner has excellent books and resources and existing content about how to break down the social world into very concrete ideas. This was also just designed by a parent because she recognized that her child needed to be reminded of this concept each time he approached group work. So this was an individual who every time he approached group work was kind of falling into the same social traps. And the parent said, I think this is a memory issue. I think that if I look at this from an executive functioning lens and give him a flow chart so that he doesn't have to hold this information in his mind, he is going to be more successful activating and acting on it each time. So one of the important pieces of these tools is that they remove the expectation that the individual memorize them. So if you as an individual, or if you're here to think about someone in your care that struggles with memory, that's an important social competency support. Don't expect them to memorize the tools, because then they have to recognize they're in a context that they have to remember them, initiate them, activate them, follow through. And you've just asked someone with a vulnerable executive functioning system to do something their brain is really going to struggle to do. So remove the expectation of memory, make the tools, make the visuals, make the flowcharts, and keep them available. I see all the time that parents and teachers will think a teenager is being independent when they don't need the visual anymore. Nope, that is not clinically sound judgment. The goal is not to get rid of the visual. The goal is to use the visual independently, to recognize when you need it, and then to be empowered to use the tools that will help you be successful. Here's another example. This is a visual that a family created that they just made about 20 blank copies and kept in a drawer in the kitchen. This is a way to break down a social situation. Again, abstract, concrete. So I observed you did this. Therefore, I was thinking, and so I felt, and so the outcome was blank. So this is a way to make a methodical linear link between a social behavior and an outcome an individual received. It removes any doubt, or not any doubt, but the goal is not to make assumptions about what someone was thinking or feeling, just make it transparent. Let's talk about it. If I observed you do this instead, I would think this. Then I would feel this, and you'd probably get to this outcome. So this is one way to support a lot of teens I work with. Understandably, you're pretty outcome invested, right? I want money. I want friends. I want my iPad. I want you to get off my back. I want this item. So you can work outcome backwards. You can say, I hear you want this. Let's come in backwards then. So there are lots of different ways to approach this. But again, when it's in writing, the individual does not have to hold the concept in their memory. So this is where social competency teaching is really hard for individuals with compromised working memories, because you have to hold all these things at the same time. So a tool like this moves us away from memory as a core expectation as well. Please be neutral. Feelings and practical outcomes are both very valuable motivators. I work with a lot of parents who say, but I want my teenager just to want to make me happy. Well, just wait until they're not a teenager anymore, right? So part of being a teenager is maybe you're not as invested in other people's feelings. Maybe you're more invested in tangible outcomes, and that's okay because it means you're teenaging and right. So the last strategy that I'm going to talk through, and then I'd love to open it up for questions. So another question I frequently get asked, which is why I chose to include this, is what is an age appropriate way to help people keep track of their relationships? It's really hard. If your memory and your executive functioning aren't always 100% there for you, it is really hard to remember, to store and remember things about other people. This is abstract information, and our brains don't love that. So this is an example of a grid that is I won't say that this is entirely non-condescending, because I don't know a lot of teenagers that want to sit down and talk to a parent about their friends and what they know about them. If you have a relationship with your teen, or if you're someone that has a good relationship that your teenager would want to open up to, this is how we want to start to help the brain organize to store social information. These are the people. These are some things I've learned about them. Then to set goals to move forward in our social development, we identify the areas that are not there yet. This then creates the next question that I asked when I engaged with this person. You know, I was realizing that I don't know your favorite food. So this is an executive functioning lens on social competency. A behavioral lens to this would sound like, hey, the next time you see John, what are 3 questions you can ask him? That's okay. But from a motivational standpoint, those questions don't have a ton of meaning for me. I'm just answering you. I'm going to say, oh, I'll ask him if he has a cat. I'll ask him what he did this weekend, and I'll ask him blah, blah, blah. They don't have deeper meaning. There's not a bigger reason to ask those questions. This gives us a bigger reason to ask those questions. And then lastly, it gives you data to start to identify who you could move forward with, and what are your shared and preferred interests. This is another example of making the abstract concrete. I get a lot of questions from parents who are worried about their child, teen, young adult's ability to accurately manage how close they are with someone else in their life. This is nearly impossible for anyone these days with social media, right? On Facebook, apparently I have 1,600 friends. I'm not heading out to dinner with all of them. Right? So this language of a friend is ever evolving. This is an example of how you concretely identify where you are with someone in your friendship or social relationship pyramid. So we might call this down here acquaintances, relationships, close relationships, intimate personal relationships, closest friends and family, best friends or romantic partners. So it's a way to conceptualize this information. So the last couple of slides are just a couple of take-home tricks that capture some of the things I hope I've said verbally and orally in our conversation today. Check your own assumptions. Did your teen or your child really get the relationship between a behavior, a thought, a feeling, and an outcome? Talk, you'll feel better. Share your perspective. This, I say this a lot to educators, especially high school teachers, when they think every kid is being rude. What happens if for one, I gave this challenge to a group of high school teachers, okay, for 1 week, every time you think you get a rude answer, respond with, that came across as rude, did you intend it to be? And what would happen at the end of that week? Thoughts about what might have happened this isn't really fair because you can't really answer it because we're a large group. But you can guess what happened at the end of that week is there were fewer blowups. Because the teen would, oh, nope, sorry, just had a bad day. Where's the homework? And it didn't take us down a harder road. Clear objectives, especially with teens, setting clear social goals with a short lifespan, goals that are going to take more than 3 months. Maybe there's a smaller version of that we're all going to better be able to keep in mind in the near future. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. So if someone who was diagnosed OCD can't set a goal more than 3 months from now, I'm just going to suggest we all be a little more realistic about our timeframes. These are there are some terms in here that we're not going to get into. Power cards, dopamine boosters. These are all specific tools that if we have time in the Q&A, I'm happy to go into more detail about. And then lastly, a reminder for teens that they can smell your BS a mile away, right? So you really got to be honest. If you're talking about group work, I went into a high school the other day and the teacher said, all right, friends, we're going to start the lesson. And I was like, oh, you just lost them because they are not all friends, right? So realistic, authentic descriptions of why we want to be socially competent. Just a reminder in case I haven't said it enough. The last tool in here, we're not going to get into because I'd like to get into a Q&A, but in the interest of empowering parents, which is something I think Bonnie and I share in our goals and working with parents, this is a tool called Declarative Language. So a lot of these were proactive. A lot of the things that we've talked about are proactive. I imagine with teens that you don't have a visual you can whip out every time something goes a little weird, right? So the last couple of slides here encourage us to think about a way we could shift our prompting style, shift our verbal cueing style that's less about behavior and more about read the situation, activate your background knowledge, try to connect a schema. These behavioral prompts over here are going to get you a quick behavior, maybe will get you a quick behavioral response, but you just did all the work. You just looked for the schema. You just connected all the dots and you gave your teenager what they should do. First of all, they're going to resent you for it. And then secondly, you're not helping them practice and build towards independence. You want them to sit there and say, oh, yep, something has happened. Okay, so I should do this next. The only way to build independent social competency is to give people time to make those evaluations. And over time, the processing time gets shorter and shorter. Be sure, if you're a parent or an educator, match your response to the behavior. This is one place that I'm not sure this social thinking curriculum of expected and unexpected did us a ton of favors, because I think it muddied the waters a little bit. I hear a lot of parents and teachers and clinicians tell someone a social behavior was unexpected when it was just flat out inappropriate. We lose clarity when we don't also give clear social feedback. It doesn't have to be emotional, but clear social feedback is our due diligence to help individuals become their best social selves. So I want to thank you for hosting me today. And thank you for letting me talk about something I'm incredibly passionate about. Olivia and Bonnie, I want to thank you for teeing me up with such a great personal anecdote to all of this. And I will stop my share because I would love to get to some questions. Or Olivia and Bonnie, please, any responses to something that I shared that you agreed with or disagreed with?
Thank you so much, Elise, Olivia and Bonnie, all of you. I never heard this so well spelled out. It's amazing because it's really easy to lost in the way we are supposed to function, and not even trying to get yourself on the feet of the other person, with neurotypical functioning or not. But what you just did in these few minutes is really remarkable. I want to remind everybody that the videos of the last few sessions that were missing in the YouTube channel have been just edited by Alex, and they're going to be available very soon. We want to thank Alex for all that work.